longest time has primarily been a girls and women's conversation. We've not involved men for some time now, but recently we are in the quest to end this vice. Just to start us off, do you think they play a role in this conversation?
Thank you. Thank you very much. And allow me to first do something and at least help us understand why really faith is in this meeting today. There are so many reasons. There are several, very few reasons, not many, but several reasons why I am very passionate and I am committed to the agenda of male engagement. But today, I want to just reveal one reason because it is really within this concept. When I was a young girl, I attended AIC Girls Kajiado. It is a school within Kajiado County, and as you know very well, we have a 22% of child marriage rate in Kajiado County. So when I was a young girl back in probably 1995, 1996, I lost a friend. And when I lost my friend is she had gone through, sorry, my friend went through FGM and later she was married off. And this happened when she was in class 8, I was in class 7. And then when the results came out, I was made to understand that she had been married off. Unfortunately, in trying to get out of the marriage, my very young friend died by suicide. So this is a letter I wrote to my good friend Kwantoi that I want to read very quickly. It's part of the book that I'm writing on my journey to male engagement and inclusion that should be out in a few months. My dearest Kwantoi, the sun landed in the far west and took you with it. The darkness where the room did not dwell swallowed up a piece of me. I wish I had the powers to save you from Ashuru. I would have eloped with you in the darkness just to bring you to safety. But the sun rested and the moon did not show up. My little legs could not walk in the dark. Though my little heart traveled to your new home, my mind is still in a daze. I wish you had written me a note. At least I would have shared the details with Mrs. Priscilla Nangurai, the God-sent saving grace to our Maasai, our many Maasai sisters, the lioness that has stood up for girls in Kajiado, the center where we would have been home, here would have been home for you. But it's too late, my dear. I wish I had the ability to turn the tide, just to have one more moment of laughter, of sharing dreams, and catwalking in the dormitory. Rest well, my dearest friend. When I become, I will tell them of your heart and infinite beauty. I will speak the words you did not get a chance to tell the world. I will tell our fathers of your pain, robbed peace, and destroyed life. I will ask our brothers to protect us more and teach our sons to get us beyond female circumcision and child marriage. Rest in power, my dear. I will trust God to find a solution when my turn comes. Love, Songbird. Ladies and gentlemen, that was a letter written by a young girl at 15 years when she lost a dear friend. Over 20 years now, close to 30 years, God has given me an opportunity to voice what my friend did not voice, and to at least tell my brothers that we can do better. Ask and plead with our fathers to save us as women in Maasai land, and teach our sons that circumcision is not the right thing for a woman. And that is what brings me to this forum today. It gives me a lot of pleasure that we are here talking about FGM and eradicating FGM, because it is something that is connected to my background. Well, you asked me a good question, and you asked, why do I think, why do we have, please come again with your question.
I asked that primarily it has been a women's conversation. Do you
Yes.
think men play a critical role in this particular conversation about FGM?
When you look at how FGM happens in our communities, yes, it is practiced by women who are the ones who do the cutting. But it is the men who ask, can you prepare that girl? Can you prepare my daughter? That is one. Then two, it is the men who say that I want a daughter who is prepared from your community, and I will increase the number of cattle. So there is the part that the man plays, there is the part that the mother plays. Again, in our patriarchal Maasai community, and most of these communities that practice FGM in the country, the men are they are the custodians of our culture. So they have a central and very pivotal role to play in ending FGM in the world. Yeah.
I love that you say that, and in your poem you've mentioned that their fathers, their sons, their brothers, and you've mentioned them in different capacities. And you've just taken us through why, the reasons as to why. In these different capacities, do you think men can be involved in community leadership? They're religious leaders, they are our fathers, they are our brothers. How do we involve them in this conversation in those different capacities?
Allow me to give you an example of what I've been able to do in the country, even before I became the leader of male engagement and inclusion. And one of the things I did was to develop a program called Nitasima Maimara. And this program is a program that reaches out to men, and especially out of school men. And then that is our entry point, but we also engage with men, adult men in the community, to set up county men's forums where we bring men together and we have ongoing and sustainable conversations around FGM, around GBV, and any other ill that is happening in the community. We also engage men for their own well-being, and we have consistent engagements that go deep. We don't just do community forums, but we go deep into the issues that affect men as human beings and how they play out in matters to do with gender roles. And we also discuss the changing gender roles in the community. So here we are, and we have been able to train some young men in the country. And our first engagement was with men in the North Rift communities of Kenya who also practice FGM. And one of the things that we did was to help them understand what is this FGM all about, and how it affects their sisters and their wives, and what are the repercussions in the long term. Because when a woman is suffering from fistula, out of a procured FGM and then child marriage, and then they're giving birth and they end up with fistula, that happens to affect the sexual life of this couple. So we started picking, what is this that affects the man? How does this FGM really affect the man? And how does it affect the mindset? Or how does this trauma, and how does this affect the image of the woman, that she's not even able to show up in her own marriage because of what happened to her? So some of these things are the things that we face our men with, and we help them understand. And with that, we've had men who've made decisions, and they've actually invited us to go for their weddings because they chose women within their communities that are not circumcised. So for me, that is a plus. The other thing is engaging with adult men. These county men's forums where we bring men together and we're engaging with them. The question that we keep asking is, must you, and what is right? What works for you? Because yes, men have different encounters and experiences when it comes to their sexuality. And I have had engagements with men who told me the one that is not cut is better. And sorry, I'm a bit explicit in my examples, but that is the only way to handle this discussion. We cannot cover it up, and we still want to tackle the issue of FGM. We have to be realistic to what happens. And so in engaging that way, men told me, the one that is not cut is not better. The one that is not cut is better than the one who is cut. And so I asked them, then why do you have to take your daughters through a process that you know very well will be closing up on her in the future, will disadvantage her in the future? Why do you have to allow that your daughters have to go through this pain and this trauma? Because this is trauma to a child. No matter how much we see it, there is robbing, there is loss that happens to this woman. A piece of her has been taken off, and at the same time she has been introduced to trauma, because we grow up in an environment that teaches us that a woman is not supposed to show her private parts to anyone. So even the process of just someone opening you up and harassing you by cutting or chopping off part of you, and that is your most private part, it is, number one, it is traumatizing, it is dehumanizing. Dignity goes off, because the person who's doing that is also not your relative. This is a stranger. So, and sometimes it happens in the dark. Yesterday, I was making a submission to the gender task force that was constituted by the president to look at GBV and femicide. And one of the presenters who was ahead of me was talking about our social norms and cultures. And she said that unfortunately today, girls are being circumcised in the dark. So the person who's doing this circumcision cannot even see what she's cutting, and sometimes they do a lot of chopping off, and it is very inhumane. And she told us of a girl who's gone through 3 reconstructive surgeries for her to be able to live a normal life. Now, honestly, when we bring these things to the attention of men, then they are able to start understanding that really they put women and their daughters through a problematic process. And with that, we are able to start challenging our social norms from a point of what works for me as a man in my community, what works for me as a man into the future. How can I change this narrative? And by changing these narratives, we are seeing young men choose women who are not circumcised. So when our communities, women, you go to the community, they say, who will marry me when I'm not circumcised in this community? And this is the call that I keep saying. Can we also train women that there are so many other men out there who value them with their wholesomeness? That a girl is complete. The fact that she just came on earth and God has blessed her the way she is totally complete. She doesn't have to be cleaned up, or she doesn't have to be cut for her to be a complete woman. So when we start our narratives and changing our narratives from the women and also from the men perspective, we are changing our society, but the men take the lead in this. Because they're the ones who sit in those baraza za wazee. They're the ones who sit in those forums with the chiefs. They're the ones who sit in their own forums when they're doing their drinking, or when they're doing their rites of passage, and they're the ones who inculcate these notions in the next generation of men. So there is a lot that our men can do in transforming this. Back to you.
Thank you so much. I love that you put it out, what you're doing and how you do it, and how it is actually bringing in results of the engagement of men in different capacities. And I'd love to just give it to Alpha, who works in Sierra Leone. And I know last year was a big year in Sierra Leone in terms of male engagement. Maybe he could give us his first-hand experience and what that looked like for him from that side of the world. Alpha, you're welcome to tell us how your experience was last year in terms of male engagement. What did it change in terms of mindset of the people in Sierra Leone?
Thank you very much. For my country, that is Sierra Leone, we have experienced a huge change of mindset when it comes to involvement of men in ending SGBV and that of female genital mutilation. Immediately when we conducted our first national convening in the capital, Freetown, we started to rally behind key stakeholders, because I want us to note this, that in my country, about 95% of the decision makers and policy makers are men, and they influence the social norms in society. So after the national convening, we were able to see how we can rally behind men, to see how we can help to change their perception when it comes to SGBV and FGM. We were able to have that kind of leadership in terms of traditional leaders, that is paramount chiefs. Because for us here, we have chiefdom leadership that is called the paramount chiefs. And these paramount chiefs are the custodians of tradition and custom. They give the go ahead, they give the permission, they even issue out license and receipts to FGM practitioners. And even when it comes to child marriage, they play a very crucial role. When it comes to striking compromise on issues of FGBV, they play crucial role. So we were able to rally behind some of these paramount chiefs that we know are like-minded people when it comes to our initiative, that is the movement of men in Sierra Leone. So we were able to experience how these men took to the center stage in advocating issues of FGM. So we were able to see that kind of experience from them. Are we together?
Yes, we are together, Alpha. Kindly continue.
We were able to see their role when it comes to advocating issues of SGBV and that of female genital mutilation. So before this time, like what my colleague just said, men have the perception of the continuation of female genital mutilation and that of the continued harassing of women when it comes to gender-based violence. But the establishment of the men movements, MenendFGM movements, Sierra Leone, we were able to see how we can influence that kind of narratives. And now we are seeing men who go to the media, men started to discuss issues of HBV and that of FGM in public. Like for us here, we have the ghettos, which we call attire base. That is, it is seen as a mini parliament where youth and men sit on daily basis to discuss issues of politics, sports, and that of social issues. And we're experiencing men discussing issues of FGM, which before this time, it was considered that issues of FGM is the responsibility of women. And men has no role to play when it comes to issues of FGM. I, in particular, become very much passionate to see how I can rally behind colleague men to take active role, because in my family, we were victim. We saw when my elder sister become a victim of FGM. My fiancé was a victim as a result of FGM. So having those experience was just a motivation for me how I can rally behind my colleagues. And I share this experience with them. But before this time, they don't know that it is as a result of FGM. Those experiences they faced is as a result of FGM. So conscientizing them, educating them on the effects of FGM when it comes to changing the narrative, they were able to have that kind of knowledge that, oh, this is happening to my sister, this happens to my fiancé, this happens to my neighbor. I never knew it as a result of FGM. So with this conscientization process we embarked on, we were able to see more men participating, coming forward, even when we have our media programs like radio programs. We go to the school, we have teachers who are male teachers that are ready to come to the media. We have religious leaders who are ready to come to the media. Before this time, people have the perception that the practice of FGM is an obligation from the Islamic point of view. It is regarded as a sunnah, but with the continuous engagement with religious leaders, especially the Islamic clerics, we were able to educate them that when it comes to sunnah, it's what the Prophet do or did when he was alive, and nothing like the practice of FGM, which was done by the prophets. So everything about the Sunnah was like positive, not about engaging on FGM with the perception it is an obligation from Islam. So the Islamic clerics were able to see and understand this. So now we are having a huge number of Islamic leaders, Christian leaders, traditional leaders, and even the practitioners of FGM coming on board, survivors of FGM coming on board to see how they also serve as change agents. So for us, the establishment of the MenendFGM movement in Sierra Leone, we see a huge positivity in terms of the mindset. Um, Let me just bring this also on board. Um, Nothing like FGM practice is done in our society without the active participation of the men. Number one, the men are the financiers. They serve as the financial powerhouse. It is the men who give permission to the practitioners of FGM. It is the men who construct the shrines where FGM practice is done. It is the men who provide the security at night when the women are in their shrines. So educating them about the hazards, about the damage or the dangers behind the practice, we are seeing some men who are coming out that I never knew this was the danger I've been supporting. I never knew that I am financing something which I have no knowledge about. Because what is happening in the Bondo Bush or in the FGM shrine is beyond the knowledge of men. So they support the practice out of ignorance. So it is us now as a movement of men to engage our colleagues, men, to see how we can rally behind them, how we can engage them to see and understand the effect the practice has on our sisters, on our daughters, our girlfriends, and even our mothers. So with this, we were able to see that kind of uniformity in terms of messaging across men. Because, like what my sister said, before this time, people think the best woman to marry is a woman that has gone through the practice. And when you ask practitioners and survivors why you do this, they will always say, I did it because I want to get married and I want to provide a kind of sexual satisfaction to my partner. Not knowing that having a wife or a fiancé or girlfriend that is not caught is more preferable than that of a woman that is being caught. So this narration or narratives has been like change in the minds of young men and boys in our society. Thank you for now.
Thank you so much, Alpha. And the two things that you've talked about, and I want to circle back on them. I just want to remind the rest of our dear listeners that kindly, if you're tuning in, feel free to drop your comments on the chat box. Feel free to talk to us. Feel free to engage in this conversation. Ask your questions wherever you need, wherever you feel like you need to ask a question, such that we can keep the conversation going. You've mentioned two key things that are very interesting right there, Alpha. You've mentioned that a great percentage of some of your leaders, some of the leaders, policymakers are men. There are things that you're considering, key things that you're considering before forming movements and having the national convening. That brings me down to the question: what are your key considerations for establishing or building these movements where men can be allies against this practice? What do you consider, especially in Sierra Leone?
One key thing we consider when building this movement, we consider men as key allies in terms of ending FGM and SGBV. It's because I earlier on mentioned that a huge number of policymakers are men. And most times the policies they pass, they don't consider the welfare of women. So therefore, having them on board like the paramount chiefs, as I am speaking here, one of our key allies who is a paramount chief is in Freetown, the capital, working on a review of one of the policy that has to do with women's empowerment. And from the background information is given me that this is the stage they've gone through, is like helping to see how the role of paramount chief can be into that document wherein they can help to monitor in terms of the issuing of license or receipts to FGM practitioners, because many of the women who practice FGM allege that they never did FGM initiation without getting receipt or license from paramount chief. So this allegation has been ongoing around the society that they provide the permission. But they are also countering short statement that they are not the individuals that provide that permission, receipt, or license, but rather from the treasury clerk, that is the court clerks. So they are now asking that they are the custodian of tradition. So they are asking for them to have that kind of free power to undertake or monitor the practice of traditional practices so that they can know which one is good to give permission for and which one is not healthy to provide a license to. So we see them as very strong ally that can help to bring in policies that can help in safeguarding the women and girls in our society.
Thank you so much, Alpha. That is very interesting. And I'm going to tap into something that you also say that is going to be bringing Bernard Ogoy on board. You talked about shifting narratives. I must say I'm very curious, and I know most of us are very curious. Is the media picking on these changes that are happening, that for a long time we've not involved men, but here we are, we're involving men? Is the media picking on this narrative? Are we having the media aid us in this allyship and strengthening of allyship? Bernard, please come on board and tell us whether the media is picking up on some of these stories that are helping us shift the narratives.
So thank you so much. I'm sorry I was not available when the introductions were being done. I was just completing another meeting, but finally I'm here. So my name is Bernard Ogoy. I work with Journalists for Human Rights Kenya. Journalists for Human Rights is a Canadian organization, and our work is basically to support journalists to tell human rights stories with a gender lens. And part of the work that we've heavily engaged in is advocacy around ending FGM using the media. So we do trainings for the media, and it's some of the things that I'm going to talk about. But yeah, I want to confirm that yes, the media is doing its best, whatever it can, to ensure that the end FGM campaigns are sustained. And maybe I start by just looking at why media campaigns. Media to end FGM is a very critical partner. So the media is able to support us in raising awareness and educate the public about health risks, human rights violations, and psychological impacts associated with FGM. It is therefore important that we leverage on media platforms so that we can be able to create educational narratives. And these narratives that we choose to pick on should be able to challenge, but also to mobilize various stakeholders to step up efforts and avail resources towards ending FGM as a vice. It therefore calls for a collaborative approach from the media, civil society, local communities, and of course, government representatives, thereby, looking towards collective responsibility, because all of us must put our hands on deck to ensure that we change perceptions, we change ongoing narratives, we demystify myths around female genital mutilation practice in various societies. Probably something else that I thought of looking at is, where are we with the media in Kenya today? And so this is helpful in, helping us choose what best platforms to use in our media campaigns. So the 2023-2024 report by Media Council of Kenya rated TV and radio as the main sources of information. Of course, we also have newspapers and alternative media. But in terms of when we want reliable information, we look at mainstream media. And so that is very important for us to note. Importantly also is that 1 in every 3 Kenyans, 1 in every 3 respondents, consume radio content. And so that should also be able to guide us in terms of where should our priorities be in terms of which media outlet. Especially, I know most of our organizations that work on MenendFGM campaigns are rural-based in the communities, and that is where FGM is practiced. So it is important to take note of that as well. And of course, radio consumption also popular among rural dwellers, rural audiences. Again, that should direct us towards thinking about community media. So when we have different community media outlets around us, very important to look at that. Appropriate time for listeners is often in the morning, 6 to 9, and of course 7 to 10 p.m. Now, this also can vary from one community to another depending on the social construct in those communities. But in essence, radio has the highest level of trust also, followed by television. It doesn't mean that people don't trust newspapers and other media outlets, but could be informed by issues around accessibility of these platforms. If, for example, I want to do a campaign on ending FGM, will I go for a newspaper when I'm targeting conversations in my community in West Pokot County, for example? It is highly likely that access to newspapers is limited in those areas as well as TV, but people can access, other media platforms.
All right, thank you so much, Bernard, for that breakdown. And you've told us that the media is doing its best to pick up on this narrative. You've given us a breakdown on the most listened to. You've told us that there's alternative media and there's all this. Last time when we were having this conversation, and I think probably you had a conversation, media did receive a lot of heat over trust issues. Do we still trust the media narratives that are out here, and especially when it comes to the men and boys? We're trying to build an allyship, but the narratives about men and boys out there is not really looking good for them. How then do we demystify that and get back to a point where we can have men part of this conversation, as part of this conversation, without the perpetrator narrative, however true, taking precedent more?
Thank you. Let me start by saying that rated among all different sectors, the media still retains its trust. So when we want to look at the executive, is it more trusted by Kenyans or by Sierra Leoneans than for example, the legislature? No. If we want to look at between the judiciary and the media, who still receives trust in terms of informing Kenyans? It's still the media. So, but I know there are gaps. I mean, it cannot be perfect. And as journalists for human rights, that is one of the things that we are working with. And part of my conversations will involve around how we are engaging journalists. When we do trainings, what is that training supposed to trickle down to at the end of the day? And what issues should journalists, put into perspective when they are thinking of a story idea, when they are planning to invite, duty bearers into the studio, for example, when they are planning to invite MenendFGM campaigners in the communities, what are the issues that they should put into consideration? One of those issues is, of course, getting the voices of men into the discussions. The whole issue about participation. Because as my colleague Kamara did say earlier, that the consumers of female genital mutilation is men. It's done for them. So if we are doing media programming without listening to their voices, because when we invite them, it means that we are giving them an opportunity to respond to some of the narratives that are out there. We are giving them an opportunity to say that probably they are not the ones to be blamed, and if they're the ones to be blamed, then they tell us, where their place is in ending female genital mutilation. So these are conversations that we keep having, with the media, looking at, the media providing information that can change public perceptions about the practice, getting testimonials and personal stories, lived experiences of FGM survivors. These are conversations that we try to push the media, to to ensure that they have space for, whether it is for print, whether it is for, radio or TV, in mobilizing stakeholders to be in those different shows, that they ensure they include even those voices that are alternative, voices that are, considered against what as an organization I may be pushing for towards ending FGM. I mean, a few years ago, and I'm not sure if that case has been concluded, of Dr. Tatu, who had gone to court to push for, the ban on the FGM law in Kenya. What we keep asking the media is, should they continue shunning those voices from appearing in the media, or should they provide space for those voices to be heard so that we can hear their perspective and we can have alternative voices that correct their positions around, around FGM? And of course, that takes us to the issue of challenging norms and narratives. We know that with technology now, we are talking about fake news and disinformation. The media has an opportunity to demystify, to challenge, such misinformation that may be out there around FGM, the misconceptions around FGM. There are probably beliefs in our communities that perpetuate FGM, and they are not, uniform from one community to another. So you'll find one community doing alternative rites of passage, but it doesn't work in another community. So the media is able to then explain the different approaches in different communities and therefore share best practices from one community to another, providing safe spaces for dialogue, and that's very important for the media. That I know when I get into radio station XYZ as an activist, I'm going to be asked questions in a sensitive manner. As a policymaker, I appear there. It's not going to be more of an attack that we're not doing this, but we're able to explain, what are the gaps that then do not enable us, do not empower us as duty bearers to implement the law as it is. Just what the media can do and what the media ought to do.
Right. Thank you so much, Bernard. You bring up 2 points that I'm going to be circling back on. That is alternative media. And there's also the key aspect of responsible journalism, the trainings that you're doing that is. I hope we're going to get into that. But I want to go through the comments right here on the chat box. I can see people are tuning in from Samburu, from Wajir, which is very nice to see. I can see Eric is here from Samburu County. Thank you so much for this conversation. He says, Asathani Sisi Advocate, one of the initiatives that we had. Thank you so much for joining. Katra Haji from Wajir County, Director of Women Organizing Women Network. Thank you so much. I see Brad Mason is here, a male ally volunteer with Sahio. I am zooming in from Sarasota. I hope I'm saying that correctly, from Florida, that is. I appreciate everything that I'm learning. Thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you to Alpha. And this is Toby, I believe. He says, thank you to Alpha and the previous speaker. I believe that is Faith, for clarity, not shrinking from discussing sex, which itself is a challenge. Very interesting. Thank you so much for that perspective as well. I agree with Bernard that radio can be used for sensitization campaigns about ending FGM, especially in rural and peri-urban areas. Thank you so much for that as well. We've gotten the statistics that radio is on #1 listenership, followed by TV. But we want to get into a conversation of alternative media and how some of us may be misusing it instead of using it for the correct reasons and with the right journalistic approaches. We also have someone giving a shout out to Global Media Campaign that runs caravans under the motto Born Perfect, free training for young people to use modern media. Thank you so much. Alternative media comes up again. I see, Faith, I want to invite you on this conversation. Last time you were on the media in terms of what they do and how they do it. And I want to give you this opportunity to maybe say something in response to that and probably clarity from last time on the aspect of media. Do you think media is actually doing justice in terms of recording the narratives that you say you collect, for example?
Thank you. And thanks, Bernard, for giving us a very elaborate approach to media. I personally feel that media has not been doing quite a lot as should be in the country, and a lot to do with mainstream media, because the first port of call is to look at who are the mainstream medias and how do they position this agenda of ending FGM. Which stations are actually connected to the communities, because we need language that is speaking to the communities. If it is Maasai, I need to hear issues of FGM in Maasai. If it is Migori, where there is still a lot of FGM in this country, we need to hear it in their local dialect. If it is in Wajir, we also need to hear this in their local dialect. But are we having these kind of discussions there? No, we are not having that. Then are we engaging the communities, even on the media, the media sessions? Like when you're doing some of these sessions where you give people an opportunity to discuss about FGM, are you bringing in survivors of FGM? Are you also bringing in fathers of survivors of FGM or husbands of survivors of FGM? I was looking at some data last year and I was realizing that Wajir has the highest number of divorce cases in the country. That is with the what do you call it, the Supreme Court report, the judiciary report. We are having high numbers of divorce cases in Wajir. Have we asked ourselves whether this is as a result of FGM? And when we are starting now to look at data, and we're starting to look at data and how it affects, how FGM is affecting the current family unit, and how it is affecting how people relate sexually, then we are now going to start seeing, we're not going to start seeing a bigger picture of what is this that is called FGM. We'll stop looking at it as just something that the West brought and told us it's a human right, and they're just telling us to remove these and not do. We'll stop looking at it as a Western agenda, and we'll start looking at it as an African agenda and saying that Africa is our business and transforming Africa is our responsibility. By so doing, we shall have narratives that are responsive to a Kenyan community. And demystifying the Anti-FGM Act will not be a challenge, even to the media partners, because if you're bringing us to just discuss this today, because it is this week, because we are marking the World Day on Anti-FGM, then we have not really created a campaign. Unfortunately, the media will only focus on a campaign for a certain period of time. It is activity-based. Yet, you and I know very well that even in psychology, you need to keep hearing a certain narrative every other day for you to create an imprint. And by so doing, you are having someone who is created in a way that they know, as I grow up, this is something that I need to deal with. But our media is activity-based. Our media is campaign-based, and the campaigns are just for a week or 16 days of activism, and that's the end of it. We don't get to hear about these things until the next year when we are having another campaign. For us to be able to have these things ingrained in our community, our commercials need to come with anti-FGM messages, and so many other things. Our in between news, major news, like 9 o'clock, 9 p.m. news in Nairobi is one of the highly watched news in the country. We need to have a message that is talking against FGM. These narratives are going to be created well in the society. We cannot leave these messages just to NGOs to run this agenda at community level. And right now, we are all facing cash crunches. We need to look for sustainable approaches.
Thank you so much. I've seen Bernard taking a few notes, and gaps have been addressed right there. And I hope this will be reported back to journalism. And maybe I'll give you a chance to respond to some of this. I think you're ready, and you're very ready to fire back. Kindly take it away.
Thank you, and thank you, Nashipai. Very valid concerns. And I just want to confirm that it's a partnership. The media is competing for so much. And I think just speaking on your very last 3 sentences about the media being more activity-based and the need to, put the MenendFGM action call somewhere at the end of every blah, blah, blah. Probably it might not work that way, but if we engage in partnerships, mutually beneficial partnerships with the media, we can always curate something. We can always co-create something that works for both of us. I'm saying this because assuming, we've been having the whole issue of femicide in the country. And so we want to ask the media that at the end of every bulletin, they have to put a public service announcement on femicide, a public service announcement on FGM, a public service announcement on end child marriage, etc. They will probably not be able to. And also to just remind us that the media in Kenya, and I believe in several other countries, is profit-led. Other than our broadcasting house, our Baba na Mama here in Kenya, the rest of them are largely for-profit entities. And so they will also be looking at something from us. One conversation that we keep having is about media sustainability in Kenya. And that is the point I'm driving home, that we need a partnership. But beyond that, what I wanted to, look out for is that well, the media is divided into so many things that they're competing for, because there may be breaking news when your activity on ending FGM, which you had invited, 10 journalists and provided some facilitation for them, thinking they will give you front page, and they don't give because a public figure just passed on and attention has to go there. So a lot of these things impact on just what the media can do. But importantly, and I think this will address the issue of responsible journalism, some of the things that need to come from our end as MenendFGM campaigners is about training and capacity building of journalists, that we have to keep on talking to them about key MenendFGM advocacy issues that they need to focus on, ensuring that they communicate these issues in a way that is sensitive to the survivors, that is culturally, relevant, so that you don't have a journalist who is talking about an issue around FGM and it is not respectful to a certain community, for example. It goes against the cultural nuances around a certain community. We have to keep building relationships with journalists, and this is one thing that we've kept doing as journalists for human rights. Organizing roundtable discussions with the reporters themselves, organizing networking events with editors. Once in a while we support journalists. And I can tell you that for the last 3 years, from where I sit, because I'm privy to a lot of stories when they're being analyzed, we normally have annual media awards, Journalism Excellence Awards in Kenya. I know for the last 2 years, there has been a report on more stories on female genital mutilation covered. Part of that has been because Journalists for Human Rights has been providing story grants to journalists to go out there and tell stories, including across the borders, to be able to tell stories from the community. So there has been a lot of coverage over the last 2 years, at least, that I know of, and journalists have won awards around those stories. So when we train them and give them capacity to, tell these stories, when we build relationships with them, so that it is not just when we need them, because we have the Zero Tolerance Day coming is when we invite them for breakfast meeting. It could be those informal meetings where we just meet over a cup of, coffee somewhere, and we have this informal engagement with an editor just to push them to prioritize something about FGM that is not working and that needs to work. They will probably go thinking around it. If they don't do it immediately, they will think of when can they send a reporter to come and just talk to you and, or visit your project area and talk to survivors there, talk to, those implementers on the ground. We can do collaborative content development, that we invite journalists into a message co-creation platform where we agree on certain topics, we agree on certain angles, and we agree on a time frame that they can be doing this. We can do public service announcements, and these public service announcements, can call to action duty bearers or bring to duty bearers attention to a certain issue that is happening in the society. It could be about medicalization, for example. I've said JHR provides resources again. But in terms of training, again, why we do training is we know when we train journalists, for example, their media outlets or themselves, they will go out there and do stories which are published in their media outlets. As audiences, we consume the content that these journalists produce and publish in their media outlets. And when we get the content that empowers us, we are able to then take action. But what we want to stress on always is that journalists ensure that in their stories, there is participation of everyone that needs to be heard.
Okay.
I know I can talk a lot around this, but let me summarize that journalists talk about, we bring everybody that needs to be heard, including survivors. There cannot be a story about FGM without listening to case studies of survivors sharing their experiences, because those experiences can inform policy. The whole issue of accountability, that we have to hold leaders accountable, and I'm sure that is coming somewhere along the way. So whom do we invite and which questions do we ask them as journalists? If the journalists are not doing their work, then we also hold journalists accountable as organizations. MenendFGM initiative. It's about non-discrimination, for example. Do we leave certain people out because they have diverse opinions, because their opinions seem to be pushing for FGM to continue? Empowerment, that if we share case studies, best practices from other jurisdictions, it can empower our policymakers to think differently. And lastly, we look at creating linkages. What does the law say? The Prohibition of Female Genital Mutilation Act say? What does a law in Sierra Leone say, for example? And what is the best practice from that law that can be emulated here? And so we try to push the media to talk about these issues so that the fears that Nashupai has are dealt with once and for all. And we hope in the next few years we can have a pool of journalists that are journalists to end FGM.
Okay. Thank you so much for that. I think we've had this media conversation right here in Kenya, and I want to understand, especially in Sierra Leone during the national convening, that is such a huge thing and such a big thing where you're bringing in leaders in this conversation. How did the media react, and what opportunities lie as we get to have a conversation on also men and changing the narratives around men in media? How did the media take it, and what opportunities lie in the MenendFGM movement in Sierra Leone, in partnership with the media as well? Alpha.
All right. Thank you very much. Of course, I know. Of course, we have a national coalition called FAP, which is Forum Against Harmful Practice. And my organization is the chair for that national coalition. Of course, the coalition has numerous training for journalists, and of course, we call the journalists we've trained as a journalist against FGM. Of course, they've been receiving support from the global media campaign that have been supporting that particular project, and they've been like working on the print and electronic on one key message, that is total abandonment on FGM. Though they sometimes face contrary view from certain stakeholders like government and other campaigners who are pushing for age of consent. But the journalists that have been trained by us are always preaching, writing, go into the radios, campaign against zero tolerance, total abandonment on FGM. During the time we established the MenendFGM movements in Sierra Leone, we've been able to have some of these journalists on board. Like we have them at regional representation during national convening and even regional convening, where we focus mainly men that are working with a like-minded organization at community level, regional level, and national level. So we have this journalists that are pushing and always receive training, and even they cascade short training amongst their media houses and in ending FGM away from what other stakeholders perceive the campaign should be based on age of consent. And of course, we've been having that movement, which, like I said, it is supported by the global media campaign. Away from that, of course, my organization, that is my colleague, laws, and even for now, we are facing a very, very crucial moment, because there is a new bill that is called the Child Rights Act. But this Child Rights Act has something that talks about putting a ban on female genital mutilation.
Alpha, we keep losing your train of thought. I don't know whether you can hear us. Okay, I guess we've lost him for a minute there. I hope he will get back. Once he does, we will let him take the floor. I see a question has already been dropped, and we need to circle back to the topic of the day. I think media has taken our conversation because, one, they do represent a lot of our narratives, and we're trying to strengthen or harness positive masculinity to strengthen alliances. I don't know whether Alpha is back, or once he gets back, we'll give him an opportunity. And I have probably, as time is running out and the conversations get sweeter when time is almost out, but now I'm going to be circling back to probably Nashipai as I wait for Alpha to come back. And maybe how best do you think we can consolidate the voices of men and boys to build a strong movement of male allies champions to end FGM? How can we consolidate those voices from where you sit?
Thank you very much for that question. And for me, I believe that when men lead their own transformation, then we have, when men lead their own movements, then we have serious change. However, they must come in the, men are naturally capitalistic in a big way. And so they need to understand that we are not just here to do what serves us best, but most importantly, what serves our community. And that means they need to have a social impact model in their platforms so that they can serve the communities and they can serve the agenda that has brought them together. So number one is the narrative that brings them together, or the intention of them coming together. And then the next thing is their commitment towards these movements, because I have been privy to look at different movements, both in the country and outside the country, and seen that there are several gaps in all this. So one of the gaps that we have is the issues of just masculinities among men, that they need to be very honest and genuine about how they're running their own agenda, how they are formulating their alliances, and what brings them together. Again, not changing the narrative. If they come together to fight FGM, if they come together to fight GBV, let them keep to the narrative, not introducing other narratives just because it is a capitalistic agenda. Then that way we are going to be winning along the way. The other thing is engagement of the other gender. And the other gender, I mean, we are talking of male alliances and movements. Can we also have women who support them? Case in point, Nashipai should not feel out of place when she's meeting with men, or she should not feel attacked when she's meeting with men, whether it is implied or physical, or whether it is real attack. She should not feel attacked or at risk when she's working with men. That means that men appreciate the value that women have in the agenda of FGM, because they're actually working towards the safety and the well-being of the woman. So they should be having an open opportunity where they also engage with women who have more like their like-mindedness, and we can be able to give them the nitty-gritties of experiences and whatever we need done, or how we see that things need to be changed. The last thing for me is ensure that we are having intergender engagements. There is the fact of engaging someone who's a leader like me and who's promoting FGM. But there is also at community level where we are having movements of men. Can they be open to having intergender engagements? This way, they are going to hear from the women and what needs to be changed in a woman's perspective. And at that level, men need to be very open-minded and purely non-judgmental. Otherwise, as long as they enter into these spaces thinking these women, they do this, women empowerment, and all these other things will go nowhere. Back to you.
Thank you so much. You've mentioned interesting things, intergender, and so many things. I best believe and I hope that we're going to be considering them. I see Brad Mason saying, thank you, Nashipai. I'm shouting yes out loud. Thank you so much, Brad, all the way from Florida. So that's a yes from across the world. Thank you so much for that. I'm going to take it back to Alpha. I hope you can now hear us before I go to Bernard with one last question as we try. The conversation is getting sweeter. Alpha, are you getting us from Sierra Leone such that we can go back to what we're talking about and what partnership opportunities exist for MenendFGM movement in Sierra Leone such that we can reach the whole country now that we've started the conversation?
Thank you. Sorry, it's due to power cuts. And of course, as I was saying, the MenendFGM movements focus across the regions. Of course, Sierra Leone is having 5 regions, and each of those regions is having representative into the movements. And of course, we have both regional and national organizations that are purely Sierra Leonean based. Of course, like I was talking, the area of journalists working on FGM, we have a whole training which was supported by the Global Media Campaign, when we train journalists across the country. And of course, they have their various media outlets. Some are working on newspapers, some are working on the electronic, that is radio stations. Of course, others are on television. The messages we've been training them is a total abandonment instead of working on age of consent, which has been like the wish of certain individuals and also government stakeholders because of their continuous desire for winning politics or votes from community people. So they always want to see how they can have that idea of working on age of consent. But the coalition in collaboration with the Journalists Against FGM have been firm and been working on how they can reach the wider community with total abandonment of FGM, irrespective of whatever the age. And for the MenendFGM, of course, as I said earlier, we have representation from across the regions, and every district has been represented. And of course, we've been holding monthly meetings, virtual meetings. And of course, there is a huge plan ahead within this month to see how we can launch the MenendFGM movement in Sierra Leone so that it can have that kind of national recognition. Through this, we can be able to reach out to more allies, more partnership, especially from other MDAs and government officials, so that the movements can be widely recognized and our activities can work in line with what Peter said in his opening remarks to see how we can able to reach the 2030 SGD so that we can have a zero tolerance on FGM. So far so good. We've been working through the support of MenendFGM Foundation in Kenya. They've been providing a huge support to see that the movement in Sierra Leone become strong and sustainable.
Thank you so much, Alpha. You said once you get to launch the movement, more allies will be on board, and then there'll be recognition in the work that you're doing, which is very interesting, and I hope we get to reach a wider audience. Now I'm going to give it back to Bernard for some of the last few remarks before I get into some 2-3 comments right here in the chat box. You talked about looking into the gaps that have been mentioned, and you're hoping that in future we could have probably journalists to end FGM. Now, maybe just in this regard, what opportunities exist among media practitioners, actors in building movements of men, boys, women, and girls in ending FGM? What opportunities lie right there? Maybe journalists for ending FGM?
Thank you so much. So in terms of existing opportunities, I said at some point that one of the things that we need to keep doing is, creating relationships with journalists. And yeah, one of the things that we do as journalists for human rights, which I hope we can touch base with Nashipai, is to link CSOs with media outlets and with journalists. So we do that very passionately because we understand that once we create that, network, then every time a journalist is looking for something around FGM, they know whom to contact. That's an opportunity. If Nashipai has something that she really needs to go out there in the media, then she has somebody on call ready to engage and that she can call and easily get access to anytime. So that's one opportunity. And then importantly, of course, is to support journalists. So every time we do our fundraising, we can always think about, beyond the international days around human rights, around like the one coming up tomorrow. Beyond that, can we always have a way in which we can work with journalists to document the work that we do and share out there? So like I said, if we have small grants that we, once in a while, we give journalists to go and do stories in areas that their media outlets might not fund them to go to, that goes along the way in, sustaining conversations around ending female genital mutilation. Maybe we can always, when we are in the field out there, probably organize a project visit where journalists are also invited. So they are not invited to really cover, but to understand the work that we do as part of, building that relationship with them so that they understand what we do. We don't have to explain so much when we want to release a press statement. We know that the journalists we are inviting already know the work that we do. When we have survivors in our programming, that's one opportunity that we can always, talk to journalists about, that there is this girl who has undergone this or underwent the circumcision at a tender age, and this is her experience. And she's a role model that, can, help shape perceptions out there for girls who maybe because of stigma, they are almost, succumbing to expectations that they undergo FGM. And we know this happens, that because you're pressurized by your peers, you decide to just, do it. So those are opportunities. When we have our reports, do we invite the media when we are launching them so that then they are able to report and, quote facts that we've availed to them? Where do we share our resources? Do we have a common pool or a digital platform where we can deposit, the resources that we have? We could be having fact sheets in our offices. We could be having those research reports in our offices. are they easily accessible to the media, so that if they call us, we can easily share a link with them where they're able to download this, maybe on our website? Do we ever think of, a platform where we can collaborate in creating content? And this content could be, for blogs, for short videos, podcasts, where we invite experts to speak about these issues, where we invite, decision makers, where we invite cultural leaders to speak about, about these issues. One of the things that we did, or I participated in, let me say, in my previous employment, was organizing community radio listening sessions. And I know technology has really advanced, but this is something that worked well in terms of generating grassroots-led conversations and solutions around ending female genital mutilation, so that you have intergenerational dialogue where people have listened to pre-recorded content and they discuss that content, because the issues relate to the issues that they're experiencing, and the programs have voices that they are familiar with. I remember in Korea a few years ago, we did content co-creation with community elders, with the religious leaders, with the local CSOs, with the local youth groups. And when these programs were packaged, they were listening to elders that are respected in their communities denouncing female genital mutilation. So these are opportunities that we can involve the media in, so that then they have, local experiences that they are listening to, local survivor narratives that they are listening to, and they can relate with those survivors. They can relate with those elders, so that if there is another elder who is still hell-bent on pushing FGM in that community, then one of them, their own, calls him out publicly, and that is broadcast. Last year was in West Pokot, where we had done a series of radio campaigns in local media, and that was followed by elders mobilizing over 100 just to decide that they are beginning to change the narrative, and just to ask those still practicing female genital mutilation to change course. And I remember during the Zero Tolerance Day last year, a woman came out publicly to denounce that she's been a cutter, and because of the conversations in the community, because of the local MenendFGM steering committee, she was making a decision. So there are several opportunities that we can, capitalize on in our spaces and bring our local media. I like, Nashipai talked about, the space of, community media, and in terms of being able to broadcast in local languages. And I think this is very, very important. And that's why I gave a reflection of the state of the media in Kenya, so that to guide us on where, if we are doing anti-FGM campaigns in media, where can we focus our attention? The space that community media will give you is far much more, and you have more control than what Radio Citizen, for example, will give you. So you have more control in the community and people listening in their local language. Back to you.
Thank you so much, Bernard, for that. There are so many opportunities right there, and we hope we're going to explore them. We've talked about alternative media, podcasts, social media. Definitely, these are things that are cropping in, and we have to see how we can leverage that for this conversation. I'm going to be taking 2 comments. Time is running out, and it's running out real fast. We have 15 minutes, 18 minutes to be specific, to beat the clock. But I will be taking a few comments right here. I see a question to the panelists. Thank you for the insightful conversation. I have a question to the panelists. In the same line of thought of showcasing success stories, have there been any benchmarking initiatives among communities that we can learn from, that can learn from each other's transformative journeys on the fight against FGM? For example, leaders and elders, stroke elders from one community meeting other counterparts from another to exchange thoughts and experiences on their experiences with fighting FGM. I guess Faith can come in on this due to some of the programs you've mentioned. Are there benchmarking initiatives that you've had?
Allow me to speak from the chair's point. Allow me to wear the hat of the National Chair for Male Engagement and Inclusion. where we work with men and boys at the national level and at our gender sector, and that is under the government, to fight FGM, to fight GBV, and that is for women development, but also for the well-being of men and boys. And that is why the committee, the National Committee on Male Engagement and Inclusion exists. So under this, we have different actors and different organizations that come together. And I want to give a good example of what happened last year, and last year but one, where the Finnish bilateral program has been working in 3 counties and working directly with men. So when they were coming up with this about male engagement, and that was a lot to do with the community commitments in the Sabaot community, they did a benchmarking with Samburu Council of Elders.
Okay.
So that informed how now the Sabaot were able to frame their commitment, and how they were able to come up with their plan on fighting FGM and GBV in their community. So yes, this is being benchmarked, partly at the national level. Of course, if you go to the anti-FGM board, you would maybe be able to pick a report or 2 on the same. So it would be good for us to also look at what are these agencies of government that we have in the country, and what are they doing. And also look at the report by Equality Now. It has some information, and also look at the report by the bilateral program, the Finnish bilateral program for Kenya in ending gender-based violence. It will give a lot of information on that. Yes, benchmarking is being done, but not to scale as we would want it to be done. So I believe that when we start doing it to scale, then we are going to achieve more. I also see a lot with Men Engage, Men Ending FGM, not Men Engage, Men Ending FGM, when they are working with their different champions from across the country. I want to believe that during some of these engagements, there is a lot of benchmarking that is done in their internal meetings that bring change to the country. Then, and that is now at programmatic at CSO level, from the national level. Back to you.
Thank you so much. Alpha, are there exchange learning programs between the chiefdoms that you're with? Do they learn from each other, maybe from Sierra Leone? And we would love to get to a point where we're keeping it short and sweet in our answers. Alpha. Okay. Okay, once he gets, are you on, Alpha?
Yeah, sorry. Hello?
Okay. We're just getting to know whether, do you have exchange or benchmarking programs between the different chiefdoms that you work in, such that they can learn from each other?
Yeah, of course. We just concluded a project on the men and boys engaged. That is where we worked in 6 chiefdoms, where we basically establish men's club. And the rationale for the establishment of this men's club across the various chiefdoms is to see how men can take leadership role, instead of continue to shift the blame on the practice of FGM to women, or seeing the practice of FGM as a women issue, and that men has nothing or no role to play in helping to tackle or end the practice. So we established this men's club across 6 chiefdoms in 2 districts. So we were able to see a very good outcome before the project came to an end. That is in December. During this period, we were able to provide trainings on what to do as men are involved in the campaign against FGM, and what not to do, because the issue of FGM still remains a sensitive topic in this part of the continent, that is Sierra Leone. So bringing men in the limelight to help in the campaign in reaching out to their communities. They need that kind of guide on what to do and what not to do in terms of reaching out to their communities. And towards the end of the project, we were able to have that kind of regional conference or convening where the various club members in the various chiefdoms were established or the project operated are able to share valuable experiences and what they think are the benchmarks the project has able to reach, and also map out a way forward as to how we can do to help bring more men on board, and for men, especially the traditional and religious leaders, how they can see and own the campaign against FGM so that they can help to reach more wider audience within their chiefdoms, within their communities, so that we can see how we all can have more allies when it comes to the campaign against female genital mutilation and that of sexual and gender-based violence.
All right. Thank you so much, Alpha. I guess we've answered that question, that yes, benchmarking is actually happening, not as much as we want it to happen, but it is happening across the different places that we're working, Kenya and Sierra Leone. Now, I will continue with a few comments right here. I see Marcelina. Good evening. I'm Marcelina, a youth for change advocate from West Pokot. This is really a very insightful conversation. Ending FGM requires a multi-sectoral approach, engaging men and boys as allies, harnessing positive aspects of masculinity like protectiveness, courage, and leadership. Community engagements, media, and policy advocacy are key in achieving sustainable change. With all this, we will be creating a community where girls and women are safe, empowered, and free from harm. Thank you so much, Marcelina. I do believe we all agree with that, and maybe we're going to have that in the last remarks. Brad is having a comment right here. He says, in the US, the manosphere has sadly been unleashed. Bernard, are you seeing, a question for Bernard? Bernard, are you seeing the same in your country? This will have an impact on so many levels in terms of combating violence against women and girls. Bernard, are you seeing the same? We will keep it short and sweet, maybe a 30-second, 1-minute answer as we get to the end of this conversation and we get to give our end remarks. Bernard, are you on?
Thank you. I don't want to mention names, but yes, it's here. It's happening. If you are in digital spaces and you hear Americs and there's so many others that, so I just be careful not to mention names, but it is here. So just to keep it short, and it definitely has an impact. Just the other day we were discussing the impact on, we are seeing increasing cases of femicide. How does that contribute? How does manosphere contribute to the increasing cases of femicide? Somebody says men stop simping, doing etc. So all that have an impact. Back to you.
Okay, thank you so much. It is there. It is definitely going to be having a great impact on so many levels. We hope we can be able to combat that in one or the other. I see Toby has come. I hope I'm mentioning your name, pronouncing your name correctly. Forgive me if I'm not. A young woman from Kenya, Masai, she moved to Germany, contacted me and asked if we could write a book together containing her ideas regarding how excision can be ended. Maria Kiminita and Toby Levin. Kiminita, Masai's fight against female genital mutilation memoir and source book. She drops where you could find the book. I mention it as a survivor's voices are so important. All right, so there is a resource that we could use. Eric says, Nashipai, consider MenendFGM to sit in the national, let me see, I'm not seeing clearly. National platform for male engagement and inclusion thematic area. Their projects are visible at grassroots and nationally as experience is the best. Thank you so much for this conversation. I'm going to be we have 7 minutes, or yes, 7 minutes at most, and I'm going to be dividing them equally to my great panelists as we move to the last session of this conversation. What is the way forward? We've seen collective approach being mentioned, multi-sectoral approach being mentioned. What is the way forward with us having just 5 years to hit our target in 2030? what does our way forward look like? How do we sustain the momentum? How do we sustain the conversation with men and boys? How do we move from here? How do we have practical measures in place in the next 5 years? I'm going to start it off with Faith will come last. I'm going to start it off with Bernard to just give us a way, Alpha, then Faith.
Pardon? Pardon.
What is the way forward? We've been told about multi-sectoral approach. We've been told to consider collective advocacy. What is the way forward? How do we sustain these conversations? How do we sustain this momentum? How do we continue harnessing positive masculinity to combat FGM? How do we work together? What is the way forward in the next 5 years as we hope to hit our target in 2030?
Thank you. Thank you so much. I think one of the things that we have to keep doing is to keep, looking out for each other. The media needs CSOs, CSOs need the media. We need the cultural leaders, we need religious leaders. So everyone's hand on deck is very important. And then number two is that we be able to, keep supporting stakeholders and holding each other accountable so that when certain narratives are not going on right, we're able to come out under this and encounter them, deal with disinformation and misinformation, but most importantly, also call out duty bearers who are not doing their work. There's a lot of funding that is in this space. Are we accountable for the funds that we are getting as organizations, as media outlets? Are we accountable for the partnerships that we have with different stakeholders? Once we hold each other accountable, I think we should be talking about not just the reduction, but lived experiences in the communities. Because sometimes we may be talking about 15%, but on the ground it's about reports not being made. So holding each other accountable still is important.
Thank you so much. Holding each other accountable is one of the things we are looking into, looking out for each other. Thank you so much, Bernard, for that. Alpha, what do you think is the way forward from this? How do we ensure that within the next 5 years, we are sustaining this conversation? Alpha, are you on board? Okay. All right. I'm not sure whether Alpha is getting us. Maybe when he comes back, we will convene. Faith, what is the way forward? What are we looking at from the hats that you wear?
So for us to be able to achieve our target in the next 5 years, I think the number one thing is that we have been doing quite a lot of work at community level, and we have been implementing quite a lot of good interventions at community. We need to bring them to scale.
Mm-hmm.
And to bring them to scale, we must collaborate. There is no way we can continue working as silos, even as CSOs. There is an urgent need for CSOs to start considering special purpose vehicles or consortiums for us to be able to achieve more. Then finally, for sustainability, we must look at the boy child. Bring all this information to the boy child at a young age and let him grow confronting the social norms that are happening around him. Let us change the narrative of the boy at a young age. Then we are going to achieve what we are looking for. Thank you so much, and thanks so much for having me.
Thank you so much, Faith, for that. Alpha, are you on?
Yes, I am.
All right. We're just collecting our last few remarks and what you think the way forward is in sustaining this conversation and positive masculinity to end and strengthening alliances in the next 5 years. What do you think?
What I think will be the next way forward in the next 5 years is to see how currently and also the MenendFGM movement region can reach out more men, especially like-minded men, men with passion to see how we can create more allies to end FGBV and that illegal mutilation, and also to have more media engagement so that we're able to
I'm sorry, Alpha, we are not getting you clearly and we lost you. I don't know whether you're still on.
And also as we hear what happened at national launch, we want to say a very big thank you to Unity, and we want to see how we can be that kind of formidable workforce to the support of Unity to have that national launch, which can give us that national recognition in carrying out our activities. Thank you very much, and thanks to our listeners.
All right. Thank you so much for that. I'm very happy that we've had this conversation. We hope to get you clearly, but we'll follow up on that with Alpha. However, I see, reading the final few comments on the way forward, I see Amina. Amina has come through to say the conversation has been incredibly insightful. I appreciate the discussion on ending FGM and how it aligns with the critical role media plays in ensuring that FGM comes to an end. It's important that we continue to raise awareness and advocate for change, and the media's influence in spreading the message is invaluable. Thank you so much. Eric Lesire says, way forward, 1, investing in research to inform interventions, and 2, partnerships and collaborations, 3, social accountability, advocacy on end FGM, 4, inclusion and involvement of communities in these conversations. Thank you so much. Toby says, please excuse my early leaving, but I want to thank you for the rich presentations and encouraging goodwill. The energy and determination are palpable and contagious. You've offered fantastic advice, transferable both to Germany, where Forward for Women works with immigrant men from affected communities, and to our I think Senegal project. Thank you. Thank you so much for that. Thank you so much for the conversation. Thank you so much for chiming in wherever you're tuning in from Florida, Senegal, Germany, everywhere. Everyone is tuning in, which is very interesting. Right here in Kenya, we have Samburu. We have people tuning in from each and every other place. We are extremely grateful for this conversation. I'm extremely thankful for our great panelists for their great insight. As we promised, the insight was definitely going to be interesting. Thank you so much. We hope to continue with this conversation more. Follow us on our social media platforms as we continue with this conversation each and every other time. Another webinar will be coming up soon. Keep eye for that, but asante sana. Thank you so much. All right, bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you.
That brings us to the end of this webinar.